He went all out at the training grounds the next day. After all, Eckhart's foolproof way to release pent-up energy, as well as to quiet the confusion in his mind, was to spar against an evenly matched opponent and push himself to his mind's and body's limit. Action had always been the best answer, the only answer for him. That is why when he opened his eyes that morning, covered in sweat and in an immediate need of a washing, he decided to head to the training grounds and wear himself out until his mind quieted down and he was back in control of himself. He was thankful that Darius had just happened to be there early, as well as free to spar against him. The stocky, pink-haired man was an officer under Eckhart's father. He was also older than Eckhart, an archnoble, and with the added benefit that they were related, so there was no need for him to hold back or throw a match when going against Eckhart. "Begin!" At the signal, Eckhart threw himself into the match, and for a while his mind was a blissful, raging quiet, a welcome contrast to his earlier tumult of emotions. He was a sharp blade with a sharper mind, wind and fire, instinct and conscious thought, as he sliced and lunged in the cold morning air. He and his sword were one. But at the crucial moment, when he had finally winded and cornered his opponent, the lilting sound of female laughter coming from an apprentice knight walking by reached his ear. Eckhart blinked, and for a split second his mind summoned forth the memories of a similar feminine laugh, a pair of soft lips that tasted of sweet wine, a warm body pressed against his, and the sound of ragged breathing after that second devastating kiss. Bang! Darius took advantage of his momentary lapse to strike his unprotected side under his left shoulder. Eckhart's shield had been a split second too late, and next thing he knew he was gasping, and all thoughts of mine were effectively chased away by the acute pain on his side. Darius's eyes widened in concern, and for a moment the other man looked as if he was going to put down his sword and end their match after Eckhart had received such a tremendous blow. But Eckhart gritted his teeth against the pain, gave him a fierce smile in return, and nodded once in a signal to continue. Darius blinked in shock, gave him a nod of approval, and they continued their match. Though his ribs and side ached like damnation, and though he had sustained damage enough that he had needed to visit a healer immediately afterwards, Eckhart fought through the pain and prevailed in the end.
Master, that was incredible.
A familiar voice sounded at his side when he came out of the healing room.
Angelica,
He groaned, seeing the now familiar blue-haired girl.
you watched?
She nodded and walked in step with him as he exited the barracks building.
For you to have used up one of your allotted monthly healing spells, Lord Darius' hits must have been especially strong.
Eckhart grunted in reply.
What's a healing spell or two? You can always earn or purchase more.
Must be nice
The girl replied, looking glumly at the floor.
to be able to train without a care. Archnobles are on another level.
Yeah. She was a mid-noble, and had likely never made enough contributions to earn healing allotments, and probably never would now that her stab was sealed. Yet there were few among the young knights who were as enthusiastic to learn about martial arts than this girl. After they had sparred several times, he had seen the immense amount of potential and had offered what encouragement and advice he could. It was obvious to him that the girl was wasting away, and wasted, cleaning equipment and caring for the training grounds. Hence why he had picked her out to serve Myne. She might not be a full-fledged noble, but she was certainly qualified for the job through skill alone. The thing was, she now stuck to him whenever possible, begging for him to teach her new strategies and tactics.
I worked on improving my forward lunge like you told me, and I'm pretty sure I have the movement down using the manipulate.
Angelica said, while acting out her arm swings as they walked.
Good. It probably still feels odd to not use your staff, but it will only benefit you in the long run if you master the movements and learn to use all kinds of different weapons. It will not be acceptable to be sloppy in your training.
Yes, sir.
She said, not at all disheartened by the fact that she had to retrain, using a totally different blade than the one she'd learned to fight with all throughout her academy days.
Sir, I would appreciate it if you would teach me.
Eckhart cut her off as they reached the courtyard.
Yes, I'll teach you whatever you want tomorrow when I visit Lady Myne. That aside, have you memorized the procedures for poison testing that I taught you and Feline?
She looked away.
You'd best head back and review, right?
Eckhart said, producing his high beast.
Yes, sir.
She said, crestfallen.
What an odd kid.
Eckhart thought with a shake of his head as he flew away back home for breakfast. He'd see Angelica tomorrow and quiz her then, and he'd not go easy on her if she failed to memorize the instructions he'd given her. He entered his house and was greeted by his attendant at the door, then headed upstairs to bathe, change, and start his day. Today he'd have to go to the castle with Lord Ferdinand. Tomorrow he would test Angelica and Feline, plus give them another lesson, this time on different ways to spot wit-with-trained nectar and other slow-acting poisons. It was imperative that they quickly learn everything they could to protect their mistress. After all, nothing was more important than keeping Myne safe. Myne, who was so innocent, trusting, warm, and... He started in surprise and then cursed inwardly. He'd gone to the barracks to train and work away the antsy feeling he'd woken up with, only to once again be hit with the reminder of why he had fled his bed so early in the morning in the first place. He glanced at the full-length mirror in his room and groaned exhaustedly, for he was faced with a sizable problem. For 10 long years, a part of him had lain dormant. He never felt the need nor the urge to visit the temple and seek flower offerings. In fact, he had never even contemplated pursuing a woman for some spring merriment, though he'd received more than his share of heated looks. He'd rebuffed all amorous advances and had gladly followed his master's example of living a chaste and disciplined life, only for Myne's inexperienced kiss to stoke a blizzard of wintry desire within him. His thoughts were briefly interrupted by his attendant, who had emerged from the bathroom after preparing a bath for him. Eckhart turned away, not wanting the man to see him in such a shameful state.
Thank you, Ermenholt. I'll handle things from here. I'll summon you when I'm done.
The man must have been confused at Eckhart's odd behavior, but did not say anything other than ask him about his meal.
We will take breakfast downstairs as usual.
Eckhart nodded, but still did not turn to face his attendant in an attempt to hide his sword.
Yes.
The man exited the bathroom and left Eckhart alone to his ruminations. He finished stripping in the bathroom, then he sat in the tub and leaned back in thought, feeling the hot scented water envelop him comfortably. His thoughts wandered as they sometimes did when he was alone and he allowed himself to think about the night before. He'd been in control of the situation, in control of himself with the first kiss. It had been a chaste kiss, tender, even affectionate. That had been as far as he'd figured they would go. Yet, he'd been surprised at Myne extending it to a second one. Eckhart's face felt hot at the memory. Myne had to have been unaware of what she'd done toward the end of that second kiss. There was no way someone as innocent and inexperienced as she would have done such a shameless thing on purpose. Yet, how could anyone be unaware that they were pouring out such a torrent of mana into another person? He'd felt branded by her hot touch, and even now he found it hard to put aside the memory of that shimmering, burning pleasure he'd felt everywhere she touched him. For a long moment, he'd been helpless and unable to resist the flood of sensation, and he had not been the only one caught up in the kiss. Myne had also made soft noises that meant that she too was enjoying what they were doing. Thus encouraged, he tried to deepen the kiss and caress her in a more intimate manner, only for her to pull back with a startled cry and a flushed face full of nervous embarrassment. A face that only brought him to the painfully obvious realization that while Myne was not averse to his kisses, she was definitely not comfortable with venturing beyond that. Back in the real world, Eckhart's eyes lowered momentarily. He gave a quiet sigh of resignation in the steamy bathroom. His bath water was slowly cooling, but he still felt hot all over. After all, his body was raring to forge forward with Myne, as evidenced by the dreams he'd had of her the night before, and by the state of his body at the moment. But he'd made a promise. He'd wait for her and not move beyond a point that was comfortable for her until she was ready. If he was honest with himself, he was thankful that Myne didn't want him like that still. He was still trying to come to terms with his awakening desire for a woman after almost a decade of grieving his long-lost love. Furthermore, memories of Eckmyne in his house and in his bed were still enough to keep him from doing anything about the situation he'd had on hand. In fact, just thinking of Eckmyne and her tragic end was enough to cool his blood. But he could only dwell on sad memories for so long, and if he and Myne continued carrying on as they had last night, then by the supreme pair, waiting for winter was going to kill him. End of chapter. So we got Eckhart's POV. We learned that Myne, whether she knew or not, she did a mana exchange, which was not part of the deal. Now okay, guys, I know you guys are gonna ask me, please excuse the inaccuracy of the fanfic. I know that it should have been repelled. I'm sorry. I'm just gonna go with like this part. Magpie going into the Lululand and saying like they don't need a synchronization potion. Sue me.
Oh no, Magpie. No, Magpie. We are talking about Angelica and the chat.
Yes, you did her dirty.
Okay, cool. Let's talk about that. Because that one came up in one of the comments, and I was like, oh man, I forgot about that detail. But let's talk about Angelica. We did see that Angelica is here, and she is being adorable as always. By the way, a note that I want to make sure to put in there and to read aloud. Thank you to Fergie for proofreading this chapter. The scene with Angelica was basically mostly all Fergie. He was doing the little action with her, practicing her little sword movements, and yeah, I like that. But that was mostly Fergie. Thank you, Fergie. Says, I'm imagining Darius like Kobe from One Piece. Kobe from... I'm now curious. How does Kobe from One Piece look like?
I will send a photo.
Okay, do send a photo. Ritza, hello Ritza CH says, have to love Angelica in this fanfic. Yeah, so eventually Myne is gathering her the other Weave's retainers. So far, you guys, first of all, we had Roderick and Feline. And they're her scholars, and Feline is kind of scholar attendant. Then we have Hartmouth, you guys. He found his way there. Now we have Angelica. So that's 4. Who else do you think is going to join the lineup? Who do you guys want to join the lineup? We still have, let's see.
I know who isn't. And no spoilers.
Yeah.
No spoilers, but like, you mentioned that there was a purge, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes, I did mention there was a purge. A lot of people are asking me stuff, so yeah, I don't know. We'll see. We'll see what other, if there are others that join her retinue. All right, let's see. Angelica is too adorable and she deserves so much more than just cleaning. Yes, I agree, Yukihime. Oh, I see the picture. Okay. Except he just needs a goatee. Somebody add a goatee on him. Darius is supposed to have a goatee. But yeah. Yeah, that's actually a good representation. Is he a good fighter? Haven't watched One Piece, as you guys can tell.
On the last episode,
He is in training,
he was all out in the last episode. He was very good.
but he's in training under a legend, so.
Okay, good to know. And let's see. So we have Angelica was being wasted by just cleaning and doing, menial tasks. So they're going to use her for other more profitable things as one of the people that go with Myne to social events. Feline is now going with Myne because she's now kind of like attending her a little bit. But Eckhart's like, yeah, we also need another person. So that's why he has Angelica, who is pretty good with the sword. She's just dumb as a rock. But that doesn't matter. As long as she can memorize the stuff that she needs to memorize, she'll do. If she can...
Memorize.
Yeah. All right. So, let's continue on reading. Chapter 47, and it is revisions. So Myne and Eckhart. So the summary is settling into a new routine with Eckhart, plus the reappearance of a certain naughty book. All right. Myne. As the god of darkness spread his starry cloak across the cloudless autumn sky above Ehrenfest, the sound of sixth bell rang out from the temple and city gates, marking the end of a workday. Myne, however, remained just as she was in her office and continued toiling at her desk. Usually by the time sixth bell was ringing, she would have already completed putting on the finishing touches on her attire, and she and her attendants would be getting ready to receive her dark lord. But today she was not dressed in one of the usual sumptuous gowns, nor was she thinking about what song she might play in her Harspiel to entertain her guest. She wasn't thinking about Eckhart at all. So absorbed was she in her work. She rifled through the dog-eared pages of a manuscript, aggressively cutting out lines of dialogue here, adding notes at the margins there, and even crossing out entire pages of writing. This was her baby, her first quote-unquote grown-up work of fiction, and which she'd considered finished many months ago. However, at the moment, she was in the middle of furiously revising it. Months ago, she'd sublimated her feelings of love and yearning into her writing, and Summer's Sigh, a bittersweet romance like the schoolgirl stories of her old life, had been the result. She'd been vastly proud of it, and as the final weeks of her tenure in the temple had approached, she'd ordered a limited print on the sly. Now, however, she was free to print what she wished, and she didn't have to limit it to a few dozen books. She intended to market it properly, with the goal of introducing novels to more than just Benno and Frida's enthusiastic friends, family, and associates. The thing was, she heard a knock, and she looked up to find Eckhart leaning against the doorframe, arms crossed and smiling at her.
Eckhart!
She exclaimed, putting down her work. He sauntered toward her.
I came here prepared to apologize for being late, but it seems that perhaps you need more time.
Myne smiled nervously and looked down at her manuscript. She tightened her hold on her quill slightly because she really did want to take him up on the offer.
I am almost done. I only need to finish a few pages.
However, Franz stepped forward with a smile that Myne already knew from her days as a shrine maiden.
Lady Myne would never dream of keeping a guest waiting for dinner.
Right.
She said, putting her quill back in the holder and trying not to show her disappointment. However, Eckhart waved his hand.
It is fine. I can wait a little longer.
He said, leaning toward one of the bookcases and plucking out a book at random. He then sat on one of the long chairs in her office, located in a small area, just a few feet away from her desk, where she sometimes entertained people who came in to talk business with her. Good thing the chairs were soft and large, because he made himself comfortable in one of them, opened his book, and began perusing its contents.
Aren't you hungry? This can wait, really.
Myne said, trying to sound convincing.
Keep working.
He said without taking his eyes off of the book.
The food's not going anywhere, right?
Myne hesitated, caught between Franz's silent disapproval and Eckhart's assurance that dinner could wait. But Eckhart had said it was all right, so surely she could take him at his word. Besides, once he got engrossed in his book, he'd be fine. Time would fly,
Fran,
she said at last.
I need to finish. Inform Ella to hold my dinner for half a bell and then please serve it upstairs. Meanwhile, you can all eat first.
Franz's eyes opened in horror at her suggestion that her staff eat ahead of her. But after a short back and forth where she countered his objections about propriety with her personal treatise on labor's rights and basic human decency, he finally gave a single resigned nod and obeyed.
Right.
She said, taking up her quill again.
Let's finish this.
She flew through the final pages in what seemed to be like minutes, and at last sighed contentedly when she was finally able to put down her quill.
Hold on. Let's have dinner.
She said, stretching, only to find that Eckhart was leaning back in his chair, fast asleep, with the book in his hand. She'd never seen Eckhart sleeping, let alone relaxed like this, so she felt a little bad at waking him up. Yet she'd feel worse at letting him go hungry for much longer, so letting him sleep was not an option. She got up silently and sat next to him, intending to shake him slightly by the shoulder to wake him up. But once she was closer to him, her eyes traced the line of his profile, and something inside her stirred when she realized that Eckhart was, after all, very attractive. She liked his hair and the way it fell over his brows. That was probably why she always had the urge to brush his hair back from his face and run her fingers through it. Maybe it reminded her of Ferdinand, but now that she was seeing him in a better light, rather than by firelight, she realized that he was handsome in his own right. She liked his strong features, features that befitted the face of a noble warrior. Her eyes rested on his strong chin, his Adam's apple, and now that she was up close, she could finally see what she'd only felt last night, the shadow of his beard. She swallowed dryly at the realization that the man that had held her, kissed her, and caressed her by firelight, the man that she had kissed back, was impossibly virile. He was every inch a man and a protector, and she liked that about him. Her heart began to beat a little wildly, but she took a deep breath to gather her wits and clear her head.
Enough. This is Eckhart we're talking about.
She shook him by the shoulder and called out his name, but was not prepared to see the man in front of her wake quickly, almost as if startled, only to blink quickly and relax when he saw where he was and who was with him. He smiled at her warmly, and it occurred to her that Eckhart looked at her as one would look at something they loved.
Eckhart?
She said, feeling confused. He groaned softly and rubbed his eyes while apologizing for falling asleep on her. However, He was back to normal and handed her back her book with a rueful grin, and not a trace of that tender look in his eyes. She breathed out in relief and then extended her hand to lead him upstairs for dinner. It had taken some time for Myne to get used to living in her new home in the noble's quarter. Her house was marvelously furnished, and when she'd first set her eyes on it and had entered it, it had reminded her of one of those ornately decorated doll houses she'd seen as a child in a museum in Japan. There was luxury wherever she looked: gold, silver, gems, and crystal, thick carpets, rich tapestries, and richer furnishings, fabulous clothing unlike any she'd ever worn before. She was like a princess living in a splendid castle, or palace. But the thing about living in palaces is that they don't ever feel like home. On an afternoon not long after she'd begun living there, Myne had listlessly wandered the long hallways of the house and explored it from bottom to top. Feeling restless, lonely, and broken-hearted, she had ended up crying in some small out-of-the-way attic room, just as the sun had begun to set and the shadows around her began to stretch and lengthen in the stillness of the house. She'd remained huddled in a corner, crying her heart out until everything around her was completely dark. Dark and silent. When they'd found her, she'd powdered several face stones and was barely conscious. And from that moment on, Myne was always under the watchful eye of an attendant. After that incident, Fran, Rosina, and Delia strongly suggested that her family come visit her more regularly, and while Myne had been hesitant to bother her family and disrupt their schedules, she'd eventually agreed to Fran summoning them, so long as he didn't tell Ferdinand about what had happened. Myne knew that her family would never, ever feel at ease if she were to entertain them in one of the many fabulously decorated formal rooms, so she picked one of her favorite rooms in the house for her new plan. There were 2 rooms that had balconies. One faced east and the other west. She chose the one that faced west and ordered her army of attendants to remove all the furnishings it contained and redecorate it with simpler furniture. As she'd already explored the house, she'd seen some older furniture in the attic that she could use, and the rest she ordered from the large stores in the lower city. Her goal was to recreate the feel of her cozy, humble home in the lower city, so that when her loved ones came, they felt at ease. In the end, the result was not so bad. The furniture was still on the expensive side, looking more like the kind you would find in Frida's house, but it was acceptable for her purposes. Rather than having expensive finery to decorate the room, she focused on soft cushions, indoor plants, thick area rugs to dampen the sound, blankets and throws, scented candles, doilies on the tables, and other such things to make her home feel cozy, so that in the end, the upstairs room, as she called it, felt more like an apartment home, complete with dining area and living room. It was her little hideaway. She liked to work in her garden on her days off, but on days when the weather didn't permit it, she would have a book from one of the reading rooms brought to her, and she'd read by the fireplace or by the window seat if the sun was shining. Food was brought up via dumbwaiter, and if she was sleepy, she could rest on one of the chaise lounges she'd ordered. On evenings when she didn't have to entertain Eckhart, she'd always eat here by default. It just made her loneliness more bearable. When she brought Eckhart to the upstairs room, she wondered what he'd think about it. As an archnoble, he certainly had high standards, but she thought she knew him well enough to be fine with eating together in a less formal setting than in the fine dining room downstairs. When she let him in, the fire in the hearth was crackling, and there was a scent of herbs in the air from the scented candles. Best of all, the food was just coming up the dumbwaiter, so they could soon begin eating. She kept the liquor and cups on the sideboard, so while her attendants put the dishes of hot food on the table, she poured out some drinks for them both.
Wow,
Eckhart said, glancing around.
this is nice. It has almost the same feel as our reading room.
Except, of course, The reading room was still splendidly furnished, while this was less so.
I hope it's not too casual for your liking.
Myne said, handing him a glass.
Also, sorry, I just poured what I had on hand.
Eckhart took a careful sip of his drink and blinked in surprise.
What's this?
Honey wine. It's my dad's favorite.
She said fondly as she took a sip of her own cup.
I take it you've never tried Ehrenfest Lower City specialty?
Eckhart shook his head.
It's no Dunkelfelder Visa, but it's still nice and strong. I like it.
He said, drinking the rest of the contents of his glass. Myne smiled and noticing that the food had been set out, pulled Eckhart toward the table so they could eat. Apparently, when she said that they'd have less formal evenings, she truly meant it. At first, he had been taken aback by her leading him upstairs and in the direction of her bedroom. What was she intending? To his surprise, she opened another door and led him into a different room.
Are we still in the Nobles District?
Long ago, before he'd even entered the academy, he'd gone up north to visit some family members in the summer, and he had tagged along with some of his older cousins who had decided to go to the mountains to hunt down fey beasts. They had brought only a few attendants with them, and they'd roughed it out for several weeks in a hunting lodge with fewer luxuries than he was accustomed to. But it had been a fun experience. This room reminded him of that lodge. Even the fact that it was just the two of them in the room, serving themselves from the dishes set out on the table, was reminiscent of that time. He liked it. Myne seemed more at ease as well, and only now did he realize just how different she was when relaxed. As they ate, he told her about his day, and when he asked her about hers, she gave him a smile.
Busy, so busy. I wish there were more hours in a day. Thank you for letting me finish earlier.
What exactly were you working on?
He asked as he reached over and served himself some more of the delicious stewed meat.
One of my novels.
She answered, spearing a roasted mushroom with her fork and eating it with relish. Her answer made his eyes widen in surprise.
You are a writer? You've actually written books yourself.
He knew that she had read pretty much every book she'd been able to get her hands on, and that she was the genius to come up with the idea of the Kingdom of Kellerland stories. But still, he was very impressed at the skill set which he himself lacked.
Anyone can write books.
She said, looking as if she believed that statement with every fiber of her being. But Eckhart was sure that he would never be able to write a book no matter what she said.
Have we read any of them already? If not, we should.
He said, stuffing his face with enthusiasm.
They've mostly been children's books.
Myne replied.
Plus, the books that tell stories about the gods.
Oh, I've read the ones on the gods and their subordinates. There's several of them, right?
Correct. As for proper novels, I've only completed one, and it wasn't very good.
She grimaced, her nose wrinkling adorably.
But I've been working on improving the story to reprint it in time for winter. It's called Summer Sigh.
Eckhart had the impression he had read the title before. But where? All of a sudden, he remembered a conversation he'd had with his mother about Cornelius reading naughty books, and then how she'd handed him the book sometime later. That book had, apparently, been stolen from Myne's salon. Curious and wanting to know what Cornelius had found so enthralling and his mother had deemed so scandalous, he'd read it. He said, feeling his cheeks warm.
That one. Yes. I've read it. For research purposes.
Myne looked surprised, and then she broke into a wide grin which she tried to hide by covering her cheeks with both hands.
You have? What did you think?
Eckhart groaned inwardly. He did not need this right now. To know that the girl that had written such shameless things was sitting in front of him at that moment. What was going on inside her head?
It was very original?
He said and took a long drink from his cup. He should have told her that what she'd written was shameless. She looked so pleased and started talking about her book with such enthusiasm that he couldn't find it within himself to interrupt her.
It was meant to stir interest among the more affluent and literate commoners.
Myne said while absent-mindedly breaking the soft bread roll in her hand into smaller pieces.
During the evenings and the winter months, they have some extra time, and I figured, why not start infecting them with the bookworm virus and have them be hooked on short novels that tug at the heartstrings and are filled with lots of melodrama.
She leaned back on her chair and frowned slightly as she pushed away her plate.
It was a modest commercial success, but in my opinion, it would have sold better if it had been properly marketed. But then my poor story got in the wrong hands, and well, the rest you already know.
Indeed, he knew. He nodded at her words and refilled both their cups. After getting into the wrong hands, Summer's sigh had ended up causing much trouble, and naturally he thought that it would never see the light of day again. But she had said she was going to print some more copies. Surely he'd heard wrong.
Are you telling me that you're going to make more of this book and sell it to people? More people are going to read this.
Myne puffed out her chest.
Yep, I've been working hard to improve it. I think now that I have added some things to make it more realistic and fix the dialogue, it should be even better.
Eckhart put down his cutlery and felt his eyes glaze over as he thought about the repercussions such a book would have if it was circulated among noble society as widely as the Kellerland books, or the night stories that were so popular. It was up to him to make her see that putting this book out as at large was a terrible idea, but how?
Speaking of Summer Sai,
She said.
I am in need of some help. There is a part where the hero of the story fights against Evelise's wicked stepbrother to save his love interest. I have never really seen a sword fight, so the writing there is pretty vague and boring. But since you are quite knowledgeable in the subject, do you think you could give me some advice to improve it?
Improve it? How?
Eckhart said, barely remembering the scene in the book that she was referring to.
I want it to be as realistic as possible, and overall, more thrilling. I want it to be a close fight with tension and lots of impressive moves.
Myne said, looking very serious and determined.
Please, Eckhart, it would mean a lot to me if you'd help me. All you have to do is read through the passage. I'll give you the manuscript so you can read it through. And maybe you can add your notes in the margins, or we can work on it together. So, could you help me, please?
Eckhart looked into her large, pleading eyes and felt himself waver. The answer was obviously no, but unfortunately, when it came to Myne, he was finding it very difficult, even impossible, to say no to her. Which is why he mentally kicked himself when once they finished dinner, she lit lamps to brighten the room, and after sending off one of her attendants to get the manuscript from her office, they sat in front of the fire to review that shameless book. End of chapter. Notes. I had to split a long chapter in two, so this is part 1. It was a huge chapter, so this is the first part. This means next update will come soon. You will get it in about a minute. Many thanks to JC Fergie and Masquerade for proofreading these chapters. Yes, always thankful for my proofreaders. Yay! They're all heroes. I'm basically Myne telling like other people like, can you just make it better, please? This is like art imitating real life. Yeah. Let me just get the stuff ready because I didn't want to have it tough. So while we wait for that, for me to pull up the next few pages, let me see some comments here. She wrote smut. That's the first comment I saw from Patrick, of course, because he wrote it all in capitals. Eckhart, also Vincent says, Eckhart will get to know Twilight. Oh man.
He's not ready yet.
He's
just a little boy.
He really is so cute and shy.
Okay, so you guys, by the way, I just remembered Akihan, I think, in the memes, put a video of like when you're reading a book and your facial expressions. So you have like going back and forth from like anger, tension, all this stuff. But when you're reading like those kind of scenes that are like kind of romantic, like
exactly.
you poker face, because you cannot you cannot let yourself display those kind of emotions in public. It would be a danger to society.
Yeah,
right?
but that applies only with like actual smut. If they're like what they're doing here of just like being cute and stuff. No, that's when I am a mess. When they're holding hands.
Yeah. So when it's adorableness, yeah, I'm like, oh, yeah. But yeah, when it's like hot and heavy, I'm like, this is serious business. Nobody must know. Nobody must know.
Yes.
This is a cute comment from Yukihime. It says, don't worry, Myne, you have Eckhart and you will never be lonely. So I didn't know when to write that scene. I was going to write that scene at the beginning, Myne moving in, but it just like it was after the end of part 1 or 2, I believe. I think it was part 1, and I was like, no, it already ended on a really sad note, so I'm just gonna go into more lighthearted. So I skipped the chapter where Myne just explodes her house and just went straight into Lady Elvira and the newest publication, if you guys remember that, because I just wanted something more lighthearted. So, but yeah, that was a vivid picture that I had, her just walking down like this amazing mansion, and then there's like the sunset streaming in through the windows, and she's just by herself, and she's like, yeah, it was pretty sad, like how I imagined it. So yeah, she won't be lonely anymore. Thank goodness there's Eckhart who is around to, you know, make her feel happy. I think they're happier together.
Yes.
And hi Remy says, maybe she is right about peace in times of war, like Truman. I probably did I read this?
Oh, that was a reference from the watch along of Field of Dream. There was a woman who was screaming like, this is smart, we have to ban this from the schools.
I missed the Field of Dreams watch party. Dang it! It sounds like something that I would have loved to laugh about. Down with freaking. Okay, I am absolutely against book banning. Let people read what they want. So says Magpie. Oh, Vincent says, just like Fergie and Magpie. Yeah, Fergie is the one that has to help me with the action scenes. Thank you, Fergie. Also, hi Remy says, Magpie just wrote herself asking for Fergie's help. You know, it just happened that way. Like, I never actually quite thought like, oh, let me just write here Fergie. Like, it just happened. Like, I guess like on like the what's it called? subconsciously I was like, well, what kind of problem would a writer have? I'm like, well, okay, so I'm a writer, and as a romance writer, I only write romance and maybe a little bit of kind of fantasy, but like more like Narnia children's fantasy, not like you guys like epic fine fantasy, like more like children's fantasy. I'm like, man, I have a lot of problems writing fighting. So I'm like, yeah, she has problems fighting because she's never seen fighting. She's never seen a dinner match. She's never seen much more than maybe like when they fight at Trombe. That's the extent of how much she knows. She's been to Trombe fights and she's seen them from a distance, but like duels, no.
Fergie just said welcome.
Thank you, Fergie. All right, so let's continue on reading the next chapter, and it is a continuation of what we just had, but this is entirely from Myne's point of view, I think. No, actually, no.
Vincent, why goodbye, Eckhart? Where is he going?
Oh, he's never gonna be the same.
He will never be the same. Yes, Myne is corrupting him. He will never be the sweet boy.
She's corrupting him.
Now he has all this things in his head.
The man is
Could
suffering.
be done.
The man is suffering.
Yes,
okay, Vincent. Eckhart has been married before, okay? Like, it's just shameless and scandalous, but he's no maiden. He knows what's up, okay? Don't worry too much about Eckhart. He'll be fine.
How cool it is. They kissed and he definitely want more, but she's like, oh no, I'm not ready yet, but please read this book with me.
Yeah, that's what I said. Yes, I get it. And that's why he's like, I'm such an idiot for going along with this plan. He knows what he's getting into. Now that he's gonna read this shameless book. He knows. What? Alright. So let's see what happens. If indeed the conversation goes in that direction or not. Maybe they're gonna talk about something entirely serious and this will be a sad chapter. Who knows? I don't know. You just have to read and find out. So without further ado, let's read the last chapter, chapter 48, Revisions, part 2. Myne and Eckhart. Myne. Oh, wait. Summary. Myne finally gets a clue. Eckhart rifled through the manuscripts as she poured some tea for the two of them. She placed his cup on the small side table close to him, and then settled next to him on the couch, tucking her feet under her legs before covering herself with a nearby throw blanket. At first, she only listened attentively while he made some notes on the manuscript, but since there was not enough room in the margins, she brought more paper and scribbled down his observations. It took some time before they were done. However, by the time they'd gone through the scene that culminated with Reinhard and Theodore stabbing each other, she was sure that once she rewrote the scene, the result would be far more thrilling than what she'd originally come up with.
That said,
He said, handing back the manuscript.
I know you wanted there to be no magic and magical attacks, but your audience will appreciate it if you at least use a more conventional approach to portray some scenes.
She frowned.
What do you mean?
He hesitated, and for a moment Myne thought she saw his cheeks looking a little pink.
The scenes with the hand-holding, and when Reinhard and Evelise meet in secret in the garden and they,
Oh!
Myne said, wondering why Eckhart looked so uncomfortable. He wasn't even looking her in the face.
The first kissing scene in the garden. What's wrong with it?
Eckhart exhaled and finally turned to face her.
not just the first kissing scene, all the other kissing scenes, and the hand-holding, and the descriptions of the people touching each other, or descriptions of hearts racing and whatnot. Myne, that book is full of shameful acts. You cannot publish it as it is.
Myne was horrified.
What? Shameful act?
She looked down at her manuscript and held the poor, slandered thing against her chest, feeling very protective about her baby. She was determined to defend it.
First off, kissing is not shameless.
She said, and they gave him a meaningful look.
Unless you consider what we did last night shameless? Was it bad? Does that mean you don't want to?
No,
He exclaimed.
it wasn't bad. Nothing that we do together is bad. But this is a different matter altogether. You need to use more delicate phrasing in your books, Myne. No one writes things like that so explicitly. Don't you remember the Kellerland stories?
But the Kellerland stories are different.
She replied.
They are aimed for nobility. Summer's Sigh was intended for commoners. Commoners would never understand the symbolism within the long-winded poems that praise the gods in the Kellerland stories. I wrote a story that reflects a different mindset and customs. Commoners would never freak out at the thought of holding someone's hand because they do it all the time. Why, I used to do it quite often with another boy.
Eckhart looked at her in shock, his mouth agape.
What?
She said defensively.
I was a little girl.
That's still unacceptable. Who was this boy? He should have been thrashed for taking such liberties upon an innocent girl.
Eckhart!
She said, interrupting his overly aggressive train of thought.
That's ridiculous. We were children.
He grimaced.
Are you telling me that commoners begin to court when they are children? I don't understand.
Myne wanted to hold her head in her hands. She had always known that there was a world of difference in the way commoners and nobles thought. And as she'd lived in both worlds, she was more or less able to adapt to both. But Eckhart, the consummate noble, was a totally different story. And as evidenced by his reaction, the differences between the two worlds was very great indeed. Ordinarily, she wouldn't care much about clearing the confusion, but she had a feeling that it would be to her advantage to make him understand where she was coming from, and that for commoners, her story was not lewd in subject matter. After all, if he ended up unconvinced, he might put all her wonderful plans about printing books for commoners on hold, something she definitely did not want to happen. So, she gave him a crash course on commoner culture, emphasizing courtship rituals, and made her case that what was depicted in her story was all acceptable and innocent. She'd run it past her mother, Tully's seamstress friends, Karina, Frida and her mother, and even Benno. None of them had complained about the book being improper or shameless. In fact, the common complaint was that it had been much too tragic, and they had wanted her to have a happy ending in which the protagonists stayed together. That was why, in the end, rather than have one of them die, she had killed both, so that they could be united for all eternity.
So,
He said thoughtfully at the end of her lesson.
you're saying that commoners are never taught about mana mixing and all of that?
Correct.
She nodded.
Commoners have no mana to begin with, so they have nothing to worry about when holding hands. If we see a couple holding hands while they walk down the street, it is seen as cute. Just two people proudly proclaiming to the world that they care for each other.
He shook his head.
I hear you, but I find it hard to believe it. Even harder to imagine it.
Myne shrugged.
Obviously you would. You're a noble, and this must be a lot to process, but don't worry.
She patted his shoulder lightly.
I know my way pretty well around both commoner and noble world, so if you have any questions...
About that.
He interrupted her.
There's something I was meaning to talk to you about.
Oh?
She questioned as she tilted her head. He pinned her with a stern look in his eye.
What were you hoping to accomplish yesterday when you kissed me?
Myne felt her face turn beet red in embarrassment at the reminder of what they had done before, and she gasped in shock.
What?
Too direct for you?
He smiled.
I thought you knew your way around both the commoner and noble worlds.
This is different.
She said, covering her face with her hands in embarrassment.
Different how?
Myne could tell by the smile in his voice that he was embarrassing her on purpose. She felt him sit closer to her, and she scooted away until she was way on the other end of the couch. He laughed, but when he next spoke, he did so in earnest.
Granted, I'm the one that kissed you first. I just never thought you'd kiss me back is all.
Eckhart!
Myne said, pulling up the blanket on her lap to cover her face with. She wished he would just stop talking about it already.
You're right. I'm sorry.
He said and gave a quiet chuckle.
I wanted to have this talk with you, but I don't want to make you uncomfortable either.
They were both quiet for a long moment, during which time Myne was able to recover from her bout of embarrassment as she stared at the flames of the fire. Eckhart was quiet too. She glanced at him and saw that he was also looking into the fire. He didn't have a particular expression on his face, and she realized then and there that he was at the moment wearing his noble's mask. What was he feeling right now? Was he angry? Hurt? It was impossible to know that it was impossible to know now that she'd cut off the conversation so rudely. She drew closer to him.
Eckhart, are you upset?
He shook his head and looked at her.
No, not at all.
Really?
He furrowed his brow.
I'm only berating myself for being a fool. I shouldn't have brought up a subject that made you feel so uncomfortable.
It's not that I didn't like it.
She said hesitantly.
No?
The word, once uttered, had the magic effect of cracking away his stiff, noble expression.
No, it's just you brought it up so suddenly.
She flushed.
I'd never done that before with anyone, so I was just embarrassed. Doing it is one thing, talking about it is.
She turned away with an embarrassed groan, feeling like steam was coming out of her ears. Then she heard him chuckle.
Sorry. I should have been less direct. After you went out of your way to tell me all about courtship rituals for commoners, I figured it was as good a time as any to talk about noble courtship rituals and such. But that can wait for another time.
Wait, what do you mean?
Myne said, looking up.
I already know all about them. My tutor drilled it all into me so that I might not make a social blunder when I enter noble society. She told me all about the noble euphemisms.
She said, rattling off a list and ticking each item with her fingers.
The flower path to winter, singing songs about beauty while under the influence of the gods, the greeting of winter, the season of the sacred colors, Genduldus burden.
It had all been really confusing to Myne when she'd first learned all about euphemisms. There were so many things nobles were ashamed to speak of, from kissing to talking in secret with one's crush. Even talking about pregnancy was considered taboo. She had thought it was unnecessary for her to learn all that noble speak, but once she'd read the first of the Kellerland stories, a book ghostwritten by a noble for nobles, She'd realized that it was only because of her thorough education that she'd been able to understand those long passages that depicted romantic scenes. Eckhart cleared his throat, face a little pink.
I'm aware Lord Ferdinand only hired the best tutors for you. However, I highly doubt your tutoring covered, practical experience.
She stared at him, confused at how flustered he was acting.
What is he talking about?
It was exactly as he feared. She knew the euphemisms and what they meant. She knew very well all about the different things nobles did when courting, and even what took place while in a passionate embrace. However, it was all theory. No wonder she had no clue that she'd already mixed her manner with his. Finding a way to tell her was one of the most difficult things he'd ever done in his life. In the Royal Academy, students were taught this the moment they began to sense mana. In fact, males were given plenty of opportunities to put their knowledge into practice. It was encouraged that they all work on building up the stamina necessary to have several wives. But how did women receive their education? He had no idea. He'd probably just have to ask his mother to have this talk with her.
Never mind.
He sighed, giving up. He wanted to go home, as he was feeling tired from having woken up so early. However, before he could stand and take his leave, Myne held on to his arm.
Before you go,
She said timidly.
can you give me a you?
You?
He said, having never heard that word in his life before. Was it something to do with her commoner upbringing?
What's that?
A hug, silly.
She said, smiling innocently. That smile alarmed him. He was beginning to realize that everything that started off innocently with Myne ended up getting out of control very fast. Yet, how could he say no to a hug after they had already hugged many times before? Plus, he really was not good at saying no to her. He sighed and relented, opening his arms for her. She beamed a smile and climbed onto his lap, settling against him with a contented sigh.
You're so warm.
She said as he wrapped her arms around him.
When you hug me, I always feel so relaxed.
I see.
Eckhart said, groaning inwardly as he felt her pat his back as if he was a child or something. She said she felt relaxed when they hugged, but he did not feel relaxed in the slightest. Holding her had never been problematic until last night, and he knew himself well enough to know that if she didn't stop wiggling, he would find himself once again in a state that would make walking out of that room more than a little uncomfortable. He tried to imagine that he was holding someone else, maybe a sister. He didn't have a sister, but surely that didn't matter now that he needed to keep his cool. Yet, try as he might, he was keenly aware of the warmth of Myne's body. Her chest rose and fell with her breath, and the bewitching aroma in her hair. She felt anything but sisterly at the moment. He took a deep breath and patted her head.
My sister. She's my sister.
Then he realized that technically one could bed one's sister so long as they did not share a mother. So he was forced to correct his mantra.
She's my mother's only daughter. That's right. My sister, my precious sister, my mother's only daughter.
Eckhart?
She said, utterly oblivious to his internal struggles.
Thank you for your help. I'm sure the summer sigh is going to take the people of the lower city by storm, in no small thanks to your input.
Eckhart doubted it, but said nothing. She continued on.
Rita told me that I should rely on you more, and I was at first hesitant, but now I know that you are a good friend to me. I'm happy I have someone like you by my side.
I'm happy to be of help to you.
He sighed, pulling her just a little closer in spite of himself. Being needed, being relied on, being trusted. Those were things that were important to him, so he was happy that she was beginning to see him that way, even if she'd called him a friend. He was pondering about the significance of her words when he felt her draw back from the hug, and once more he found himself face to face with her. There was no way he could ever think of the girl in his lap as a sister. Everything about her was bewitching and made him feel hot. Her midnight hair, the hollow at her throat, her bosom, small waist, and the curve of her lips, everything about his water goddess, his Myne, was desirable. But it was her eyes, pools of liquid gold, that he loved the most, and in which he felt he could drown himself into forever. He should have looked away from her eyes, but at that moment the world had shrunk and was only large enough to contain them two. No one else existed, nothing else mattered, and not even the intrusive and laughable thought that she was his sister could fit inside it.
Eckhart,
She whispered, and his gaze traveled to her lips. Soft, pink, plump, kissable. He could not look away from her. It was physically impossible to do so. She must have drawn him in by some sorcery, or maybe he was the one that leaned in out of his own volition. In the end, it didn't matter who started it because the end result was the same. His fate was sealed. His destiny was to be at the mercy of the woman in front of him. It really was just that inevitable. When their lips finally met, Eckhart actually felt a sense of relief that his doom had come at last. Myne. Myne had stayed up until late last night, thinking about what she and Eckhart had done together. They'd kissed. She'd felt embarrassed and had wanted to curl up in shame at the thought that not only had she kissed him back, but she'd enjoyed it very, very much. In fact, she would have probably kept on kissing him if he hadn't startled her by deepening the kiss all of a sudden. He'd gone home after that, and she'd gone up to her room and gotten ready for bed, feeling all the while like she was floating. After the thrill of her first kiss had passed, however, she'd suddenly become overcome by shame.
what kind of girl enjoys kissing a man she doesn't love?
She thought she would only want to share something like that with Ferdinand, the man she loved with all her heart. But her traitorous body had a mind of its own, apparently. She remembered the conversation she'd had with Frida, how she had told her friend that when the time came and things between her and Eckhart got physical, Myne would basically let it happen. She had assumed back then that because it wasn't with Ferdinand, she would not enjoy it at all. But it had happened, and what was more, she had to admit that she had liked it a lot. Part of her hoped that it was only because it had been her first kiss, and that if they kissed again, she wouldn't find it so thrilling after all. That was why, as they hugged in the upstairs room, she remembered to test her hypothesis, and since it didn't look like Eckhart was averse to the idea, she leaned in and kissed him. She was not prepared to feel a sense of rightness as she wrapped her arms around him and pressed her body against his. But in the corner of her mind, she waited a little impatiently for him to kiss her like the night before.
Will he do it again? Will he try to deepen the kiss?
The most important question, however, was, would she let him? Or would she pull back like yesterday? She didn't know. She needed to confirm so many things with the kiss, but he was not cooperating. She felt like she was the one leading while he was just letting it happen. It was painfully obvious that she was doing all the kissing, and she felt frustrated, because how else could she understand what had happened the night before if he didn't kiss her in the same way?
Kiss me back!
She thought as she held him tighter, trying to break down whatever wall was keeping him from truly connecting with her. She had the sudden inspiration to do as he'd done to her the night before, and had softly nibbled on his lower lip before soothing it with her tongue.
It's getting late.
He said, pulling back suddenly. She opened her eyes, only to realize that he had somehow captured both her hands by the wrists, and she was essentially handcuffed. She looked up at him in confusion, only for him to give her a rueful smile.
You did it again, Myne,
he said, panting.
Did what?
She asked as she tried to bring her breathing and the heat flowing through her body back under control.
You mixed your mana with mine.
Her eyes widened in shock.
What?
I think it's time we have this talk,
Eckhart said gently, releasing her hands and resting one of his large palms against her cheek. He looked at her fondly as his thumb caressed her cheek and began to explain things that, quite frankly, left her in shock. Why hadn't her tutor ever told her about all this? After saying goodbye to Eckhart that night, Myne went to her room and prepared for bed as usual. Her attendants bathed her, washed her gel from her hair with rinsham, massaged her body from head to toe with luxurious flower-scented body lotion. She put on her nightclothes, and after her hair was dried and braided, she got into bed. Everything was normal. It wasn't like her head had exploded this evening with all that Eckhart had told her. Yep, everything was cool.
Good night, my lady,
Feline said, with her innocent smile, as she adjusted the room's temperature controls and dimmed the light. Delia likewise wished her a good night's rest as she pulled the bed curtains closed. They blew out the candles and quietly exited the room, leaving Myne alone in the dark with her thoughts. Sleep didn't come to her for a long time. She tossed and turned and invoked the name of Schlaftrem to give her a good night's sleep, but by the time she actually did fall asleep, she was thrown once more into a confusing nightmare. She was falling from a great height. As she flailed in the air, she screamed for someone, anyone, to catch her before she hit the ground. She heard someone call her name above, and she glanced up to see the far-off shape of a mighty winged lion circling above her against the backdrop of dark storm clouds.
Ferdinand! Save me!
She wailed. There were only a few seconds left before she hit the jagged rocks below and met her death.
I don't want to die!
She desperately reached up towards Ferdinand, who had never once failed to save her. But while she knew that he was making his way down to her, she knew he was much, much too far, and he wouldn't make it in time. Terror seized her body at the realization that she was going to die. Her body would smash into the rocks and her blood would spray everywhere the moment she hit the ground. Ferdinand would be too late. He'd never catch her in time, and no one else was around to catch her. She closed her eyes, accepting her horrible fate. The next thing she knew, however, a strong hand had clasped hers, and a pair of arms had lifted her into a high beast, whisking her away from danger. She felt almost sick with relief. It had been such a close call that she began to sob in relief as she clung to her savior.
Shush, I've got you now.
A familiar voice said reassuringly, as warm and strong hands encircled her.
Everything is going to be all right.
She glanced up, startled at the voice and thinking that her ears had somehow deceived her. But no, her savior was not Ferdinand, but Eckhart. And while she should have felt grief and disappointment, she actually felt profound relief, so much so that she felt the tension leave her body and she slumped against him.
Thank the gods it's you.
She sobbed as she clung to him.
Please, please don't abandon me.
Don't worry. You're safe now.
he replied, holding her close to his body and covering her with his cape.
Now sleep. I won't let you fall.
Eckhart then swooped high into the air with her, past the looming grey clouds, and into the sunshine that lay beyond them. When she woke up that morning, there were tears in her eyes, but Myne could not remember why. Nevertheless, the ache in her heart and the sense of loss she'd woken up with remained with her all day long. End of chapter. Notes. Thank you, JC Fergie and Masquerade, for proofreading this chapter. Any errors I made towards the end are mine, since I added the final part after they had both proofread such a long chapter to begin with. So, thank you, everybody. So, those were the 3 chapters, and I think a few streams ago, somebody asked me, who is Myne going to dream of now? There's your answer. There's your answer. By the way, thank you so much to all of you who read, especially Teal. I told you you would do good because you have such a beautiful, deep, velvety voice. Bravo for Teal, you guys.
Yes, I felt for you. Oh my god, the last 2 lines. Oh, my heart.
Yes.
But the thing is, in the end, why did you have to end so sad? No.
Yeah, I wrote that we went from blood pumping to blood splattering.
Yeah,
no.
Especially like with, oh my god, to her death on the rocks. Like what?
Yeah.
Intense.
Yeah. And I will admit though,
I was yelling in my head constantly, like, oh my god, so cute. Ah!
So I don't know, subconsciously I think Myne is moving on. That's why I had that dream.
Yes.
And so there's a lot going on with dreams in this story. So they're not just like subconscious. There's all kinds of craziness going on with dreams. Myne's having dreams. Ferdinand's having dreams. They both have dreams of canon. They have dreams of like. So there's different kinds of dreams here. Some of them are like canon dreams, and some of them are just like their subconscious reacting to the world around them. So, yeah, this is I think one where she's just her subconscious she's getting attached to Eckhart. Like she said before, like when she talked to Frida, she was like, yeah, I would never be able to do anything like intimacy or anything like that with somebody I don't love, and I don't love Eckhart, so surely that's not gonna ever happen or feel organic. And now she's like, well, that wasn't too bad. What does this mean?
It's so funny how much weight you put on the dreams, and then there's me thinking like my dreams like a dinosaur dancing to the moonlight, or like a fish talking to me about my day.
You know what? There's a lot of people that have dreams. I never really have dreams. Like people, my mom and my sister, they wake up, they're like, I dreamed that was so weird. I'm like, that's great. Yeah. And then I'm like, please don't tell me the dream. Please don't. And then they go into detail. I'm like, no, I don't care. Like, it's just the insanity of your head. Like, it's just your brain reordering itself. Like, why are you telling me? Don't tell me about your dreams. I never get dreams. I don't know if it's because I messed up my sleep cycle with the REM, rapid eye movement. I just don't have it anymore. I don't know. But, yeah. I do have nightmares on occasion, but yeah. So let's see. We have Myne finally understanding some stuff. So this is the chapter where she understands what she was doing. And okay, so full disclosure. If you guys will remember, those of you who read the original work, like when it was being published or even before, There was a chapter where I think it was the end of part 3 or part 4, where Myne and Ferdinand had a meeting, and she did something with her mana on him. And I had to cut it because I remembered, I was like, oh shoot, she's not supposed to know how that works. So that's why I had to cut it.
Yeah,
It wasn't.
I remember.
That was why I had to cut it, because later on I was like, wait a minute, this doesn't make sense. When she did it to Ferdinand in that chapter, she knew what she was doing.
Maybe she knew
Yeah.
what she was doing to Eckhart, the little tempter.
Oh, she does not.
Oh, I didn't
Yeah,
know.
I remember I was that was like my first hook on the story. It was like, oh my god, like she's bold. She's like pushing her mana in Ferdinand. No matter what, I'm telling you my feelings. No matter what,
Yes,
kind of vibe.
I know, and I'm down for I guess whatever, but ultimately I decided, like, fine, like, for fiction, fine, but I don't know, in the real world that would be highly reprehensible. But I did want to just keep Myne in character with her being absolutely clueless. And as we keep going forward, let's just remember that Myne is basically she is like, hormones are still raging and stuff like that. So when you're that age, some acts like that, they will get you like, whoop, fired up. Not necessarily because you feel something like
Hormones.
emotional, but hormones play a huge part in this situation. So as we go on, we have to see whether, as they progress onto, down the flower path to winter, how much is hormones, how much is feelings, and I leave it to you guys to figure it out, but hopefully it won't be too difficult for you to figure it out. I try to make it as clear as
please
possible.
make it much complicated.
yeah. I will promise you though, I will not use noble euphemisms. I just cannot use noble euphemisms at all to save my life, and I don't want to. That's what it comes down to. So Teal says on chat, it was a little hard on my voice to speak that low, so I'm glad it was appreciated. Teal, thank you. So just want to say thank you to everybody who read today. We had Angelica was read by Emmy. Eckhart was read by Teal. Myne was read by Yukihime. Good job, Yukihime. Doing those lines. Love it. Irminholt and Fran were read by Plamin. Thank you, Plamin. And Feline was read by Butterfly. Unfortunately, Feline, you only had one. Unfortunately, Butterfly, you only had the one line. Next time, I hope there's more lines in the other one. That way we can make Teal's life more difficult.
I mean, you are the author. You can
I
just write more lines in.
You know what? I am going to do that. I'm going to write more lines, knowing that Teal will not get around to them until midnight. I'm so sorry, Teal. I'm thankful. Teal is the one that's highlighting this, so if you guys appreciate her work, please show her some love with hearts and stuff. Yeah, Teal, you're amazing. Thank you, Teal, for staying up late.
I'm a night owl. I work evenings, so it's not actually crazy to post something at midnight.
Well, we still appreciate it. So, before we go talk about what's happening in the next couple of chapters, any other thoughts about these two chapters? Or questions you need answered, which I can answer without spoiling? Let's see. I'm pulling up
I
Ayo3.
enjoyed the dramatic irony, even if it was going into dangerous Siscon territory of Eckhart thinking of Myne as his sister.
You know what?
Yeah.
Patrick, this was not the reading to have missed, but okay. Yeah, Patrick, he would have had a field day with us all. It was, yeah, it was fate. It was fate. Otherwise, the chaos would have been too much to control. Vince, I think I heard you say something earlier. Or were you going to say something?
Oh yeah. Do we get more Angelica?
Not in the next chapter, we don't.
Aww.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
You know, Myne's story is a Romeo and Juliet. They both die at the end.
Yes, I was also thinking that.
Well,
that was the happier ending.
That's the happy
Yeah,
end.
that was a happy ending. It would have ended with the guy dying and she just living. So this was her reflection of her of her own personal tragedy. She was like, I am in love and the one that I love does not love me. It's like, and the one I love is ignoring me. So
let's
it's like she
die.
died. So she reflected that on her
Let's die.
story. And then she's like,
So
well,
she was wishing death on Ferdinand.
no, she. Well, at some point, she became very bitter. She was like, "Fine, you can just die."
Or it was the death of the Ferdinand that could love her.
Aww. Oh no. Oh, yeah. Because once she moved into the nobles district as the concubine of his retainer, that makes it a whole lot difficult, if not impossible, for Ferdinand. Because why would he take his retainer's mistress? It makes no sense. So it was basically her giving
Out of
up.
love.
Yeah,
Magpie love.
I know, love, but one thing is love, one is taking the retainer's mistress, like passing around
No,
a woman
love.
from one person to another. In that society, like in this society, like get over yourself, like she's not a property. But in that world,
I mean,
it would have
she
been
could be.
bad. Well, we're talking about in this world. Like for us, like I'll be like, dude, get over yourself. Come on, this purity nonsense, right? Like, anyway, not that purity.
It is funny how we've all
nonsensical.
adopted
Yeah.
noble purity sense.
Yeah. So not like I'm saying that purity is nonsense. It's not. It's important if that's what's important to you. But when people say, like, for example, like, oh, like this person is used goods or whatever, when they put a person's value on like that, I'm like, oh my gosh, that's so wrong. Anyway, rant aside. But yeah, the nobles wouldn't have seen it properly. They wouldn't have seen it as a good thing for
Especially
Ferdinand.
if he wanted to marry her.
Ooh, that would, yeah. Marriage
I think
would have been
Mary would be the problem.
marriage would have been an issue. Maybe if he had kept her as his dirty little secret, maybe that would have worked. But we don't want that for Myne. Myne believes
Dirty little
better.
secret.
Yeah, Myne deserves better than to be someone's dirty little secret.
Yes.
So, just
Yes.
saying.
Yeah.
Always.
I am so glad that there are no underage peoples listening to this, and definitely not mothers listening to this.
Even this, not even this bad, really.
I mean, you hope there's no underage people listening, right?
I'm sure they have other Gen Z things to do or Gen Alpha things to do. I think that their attention span could not handle it. I'm
I
sorry.
can guarantee that I have been reading such stories as fanfics a lot longer.
Well, you know what? Maybe
Nothing is guaranteed.
That's true. That's true. Yeah.
Yeah, normally smut is really faster in this way.
Well, this is not.
Like half a book in and it's just going on.
This is not smut. This is not smut. This is serious literature. This is serious literature, Vincent.
This is mad for Jürgen Schmidt.
This is
I
literature.
never said that it's smut. I just said smut is faster.
Well, all right, you guys. As we are devolving into some unsavory conversation, I think we should just end it here. Thank goodness that my channel cannot be demonetized, or this video cannot be demonetized, because this entire channel is not monetizing. So if you are enjoying these read-alongs, and if you want to say thank you, show your appreciation, please hop on over to the Ko-fi, to my Ko-fi, so you can leave a Ko-fi, But better yet, you can join us here on Discord server. So if you are just itching to read Myne, Ferdinand, and Feline, and all the other people, maybe you can have your debut as a reader, and we'll be so excited to have you here. So yeah, join me on Ko-fi. Go, become a member, and join the rest of us here. All right, everybody.
Yes.
I do hope you
There are
have...
amazing perks with coffee.
There are many, many perks to Ko-fi.
Yes, and we are doing a lot of stuff here, and it's very fun. Come join us.
And the main thing is you can talk with me
That's right.
if you join McPrice Coffee.
Except that you're never
Yes, if you
around,
want.
dude. I haven't seen you in a while.
Sorry, I had to adjust my sleep schedule a little bit. Now I have to be in my bed at 10 or 11 because I'm getting old.
Oh.
Welcome to the club. All right.
Yes, so join us here so that if you have any complaints, you can say it more personally, more up and close and personally.
So do so. Join me on Monday. I think we're going to be noonish Monday. So around this time, a little earlier. On Monday, we have updates on the fanfic. In the next couple of sessions, we'll have Ferdinand. What's going on there? We're gonna see a character return. Some more shenanigans happening.
Angelica.
We have a chapter. I don't know if we'll get to it on the next read along or the one after that. It'll be Frida in a chapter titled "Girl Talk." Ooh,
I like that chapter.
Yeah, me too. I hope you guys join us.
I want to read it.
Yeah, go and read it. If you want to read it, link for this and other fanfics that I've written are in the description. So get on over there and show your magpie some love. All right, everybody, thank you for joining me, and you guys were amazing. Can't wait to see you all on Monday. Bye, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.